And additionally, our State Department of Transportation Secretary and Governor's Office serve as ex officio members. And just a quick review of the commissioners' roles and responsibilities. Next slide. The Transportation Commission proposes transportation policy and finance recommendations to the governor and legislature. They serve as the state's tolling authority, adopting state highway and bridge tolls and setting ferry fares, and we'll talk a bit about that today. They provide, most importantly, I think, they provide this public forum for transportation policy development, holding 11 meetings around the state each year, and conducting special legislatively directed projects like this transportation plan update. And as I mentioned, they are the authors of this Washington's 20-year statewide transportation plan that we call WTP and that we're here to talk about today. Next slide. Just a quick overview of the agenda. We're very fortunate today to have the Transportation Commission Chair, Debbie Young, with us. We'll have a welcome. We'll hear a brief overview of the WTP, and then we'll move into more of an interactive discussion with you all. So this is not just a talking session from us. This is a participatory polling discussion where we'll get to hear your thoughts and ideas. And that's the biggest part of our meeting. And then we'll wrap it up with a little summary of what comes next for this project. So with that, I will turn it over to Chair Young. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Paula. I'm really happy to be here. And thanks to everybody for joining us today to help us shape this update to Washington's 20-year transportation plan. I feel like this is one of the most important things we do at the Commission. It serves as our state's overarching roadmap for our transportation system at all jurisdictional levels, and it's our chance to influence the road ahead. We can only do that, of course, effectively if we do it from the ground up. And for that, we need your input. And so we really thank you for bringing your expertise and your interest and taking time to be here to share your ideas with us. This is the second of 4 meetings that we're holding. We've already held one on climate and resiliency, and we'll be holding one on the 29th to discuss connecting communities, and on September 5th to discuss equity and transportation. And with that, very brief introduction. I'm going to look forward to hearing your thoughts and your ideas today, and I'll turn it back over to the team. Here we go.
Thank you, Chair Young. Thank you so much for being here. So my name is John Overman. I'm the project manager on the consultant team working with Paula and the rest of the commissioners and commission staff on this update. I'll give a brief WTP overview. We'll have a couple guest perspectives to talk about the challenges to sort of set up the conversation around why this is such an important topic for the WTP. And then we'll get into the interactive portion of the meeting. Just real quickly, as we get into it, just a quick Zoom how-to for those who haven't been on Zoom every day for the last few years. I've already just done this. I renamed myself as John Overman Project Team. Please do this. You can, in the participant, you click on participant, find your name, and you can click the little button or right click and rename yourself. You should be able to see Q&A and chat. So there's gonna be options to enter comments in for various questions. But if you have comments, you can put them in the chat. If you have questions that are specific to the process and you want a quick answer, you can put them in the Q&A. It's also a good place to ask questions of the presenters or the guest speakers, and then we can kind of answer those on the side. You should be able to raise your hand. If you don't see the raise hand button, you can always click the more button if your window is smaller than mine, and can mute and unmute because we do want to hear from you verbally. You can also type your thoughts into the polls and the chat. So just a kind of quick demo or trial run of the polling tool today. We're using Mentimeter, and this is going to be the same code throughout the presentation. You can use a browser window. You can also use your phone. If you go to menti.com and enter this code of 62180311, you should be able to get to our first question, which is our quick pop quiz. I will also have someone put the direct link to that quiz in the chat.
Just wanted to mention that these polls are anonymous, so please join and share your thoughts.
So the question is, in 2022, what percentage of Washington's public roads were in poor condition? 11%, 15%, 22%, or 28%?
Hopefully you're all joining www.menti.com and typing in this code, this 8-digit code 62180311.
So if you're there, you can see that folks are already answering this question. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so to get some more responses. Okay, so the majority of you got it right. 8%, according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. So obviously a large percentage of the roadways are in poor condition, and that's the rest of them are in fair or good. And so there's a lot to be done in terms of maintenance and preservation on the transportation system, which we'll talk about more today. One final quick poll question before we get into the overview. We'd like to know who you are, in addition to entering your affiliation in the chat. We just wanted to do a quick poll and ask you who you're representing, whether it's a public agency at the state level or the local or regional level, if you're a member of the private sector, nonprofit, or academia, someone from the general public or other. Okay, with about 40 plus responses in, we have the majority of folks from public agencies, either local or state government, a few from the private sector and general public as well.
Great mix.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give a kind of quick 5-minute overview of the WTP, why we're here today, and why these workshops are so important. So Washington's Transportation Plan, which Paula and Chair Young alluded to, is the statewide vision for transportation for the next 20 years. It's all modes, all jurisdictions. Really sets out to be that kind of high-level vision for the state. And this umbrella is not to say that it is the most important plan in the state. It's really to show the coverage that all of the regional, local, WSDOT plans are a big part of this. And so those plans in themselves can be more detailed. They're very important in terms of prioritizing projects and specific improvements. But we want this sort of collective vision for the state transportation system so that all of those plans are working together towards one goal. It does meet some of the federal requirements in terms of state and federal requirements in terms of transportation planning. It's a great avenue for public engagement as well as stakeholder engagement like we're doing today. And it's an opportunity for coordination. We've had a lot of meetings with local agencies, with regional agencies, and it brings together practitioners to talk about these very important topics. As I'm sure many of you are aware, there are 6 statutorily defined goals in Washington State. They're economic vitality, so ensuring the transportation system promotes that prosperous economy. Preservation, really extending the life of assets, maintain the quality of the transportation system. Safety, both in terms of safety and personal security of the users of the transportation system. Mobility, focusing on both people movement as well as the movement of goods. Environment and health, the quality of life of residents of the natural environment, ensuring the transportation system supports those factors. And then stewardship is really the how well we are being stewards of public resources, ensuring that there's effectiveness in the transportation system or efficiency in the transportation system. And then preservation and safety are starred. They are the top two legislative priorities in terms of these 6 goals, of those goals. These goals have been around since the year 2000, and there's new and emerging priorities at the state level, both seen in law, as well as just other kind of topics that are rising to the top. And so the last WTP was 2018. And since then, there have been some notable initiatives and policies that have come up. And so we want to make sure this WTP both is reflecting those previously statutory defined goals, but also incorporates these new and emerging priorities. So some of those are showing the bubbles here, but when I show you the policy pillars on the next slide, they really speak to some of these ideas around climate, around sustainable funding or long-term funding that we're discussing today, around equity. And these policy pillars can help us connect those goals to new priorities as well as local planning issues. So the policy pillars, as currently defined, are sustainable funding or long-term funding, climate and resiliency, connecting communities, equity and transportation technology. So the sustainable or long-term funding topic, which we're discussing today, ensures that we're finding solutions that adequately address current and future transportation maintenance, operations, preservation, and safety needs. So that'll be the bulk of the conversation today. You can see the definitions or the working definitions of the other pillars. And these are meant to be a layer to add on top of those goals to better connect the transportation goals to our current priorities and the local planning priorities. So as Chair Young mentioned, we also have workshops to discuss connecting communities next week and equity the following week. And we discussed climate and resiliency last week if you want to go to the website and view that recording. So just a quick overview of the schedule. We held some regional meetings in the spring where we discussed challenges and opportunities facing the state. We're getting into the recommendations or developing new and refined strategies for the Washington Transportation Plan this fall. And these workshops help us get to that or help kickstart that process to really understand where the state has made the most progress in terms of some of these key issues, where there's the most work to be done, and really what are some potential solutions that we might want to include in the WTP. So that's what we want to get out of the call today, is really focusing on those gaps and potential solutions. So with that, we're going to have a couple guest speakers. Before I turn it over to our guest speakers, just wanted to highlight some of the high-level topics that or ideas, issues, challenges that came out of the regional meetings that we held in the spring, and I've bolded and underlined some of those that relate to long-term funding. So failing infrastructure came up again and again in the meetings. Funding, just the lack of funding with the gas tax being less effective and increasing costs from inflation and cost escalation. There's increasing challenges, safety challenges. There's the need to balance both preservation and expansion of the system. So big challenges that need sustainable long-term funding to help address those challenges. There are opportunities around collaboration, both throughout the state as well as with our federal partners. There's technology that can help us address some of these transportation funding challenges. There is new funding for safety, but really there's a big gap in terms of the overall need, and that's what we want to discuss today. So I'm going to turn it over to a couple guest speakers. The Washington State Transportation Commission does have an initiative on road usage charges, so that's going to be Paula Reeves and Rima Griffith. We'll discuss that. We also have Dave Reich from the Washington State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council to discuss sort of the process for developing the forecast. So these are just to kind of set the stage and give us some background information before we get into the bulk of the conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave to give a quick overview of the transportation revenue forecasting process.
Great. Thanks, John. And good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Reich. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Economist for the Economic Revenue Forecast Council. I'm happy to be here today to give you a little bit of a real brief layout of kind of what we do. Some of this is sort of new or recent anyway. You can see on the slide there, for years now, this is more about the how we do stuff, I guess, than the what. But for a while now, we've had a setup where the Transportation Revenue Forecast Council which was operating under Washington Office of Financial Management guidance, would oversee the preparation of the transportation forecast. If you think about the transportation forecast, or as how I think about it, there's several different kind of big chunks of that. The motor vehicle fuels tax is a big piece of that. But in addition to that, we also have licenses and registrations. We have tolls, we have ferry revenues, and miscellaneous others. And so all of those have been sort of forecasted by this TRFC committee. Those are typically focusing on the current biennium and the next biennium, and then a 10-year window. So kind of a little bit shorter term than the WTP, but still relevant, I think, in the sense that it sort of hits that first part. But beginning in September of this year, so next month, that's going to shift over to our organization. So Economic Revenue Forecast Council has been around for over 30 years or so, doing the forecasting for the operating budget, the state operating budget. And so this is kind of new work for us to take on. This work was previously kind of managed by WashDOT, but now we'll be reporting to something called the Transportation Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, which is a group of elected and appointed members who will be looking at our forecast, and if they find it sufficient, approving it, and then we'll be using that for transportation budgeting purposes around the state. As that bullet shows, there's 4 legislative members, 2 executive branch members, and the state treasurer. And all of this is sort of, with the goal of continuing our effort towards greater transparency in the state about how we do things. So I think this is sort of the next brick in the wall. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of the kind of the makeup of this organization, the Transportation Economic and Revenue Forecast Council.
Did
Dave freeze for you, Paula?
Yes, it appears Dave's audio is frozen. So I think this was his last slide, just kind of showing the structure of government and where the Transportation Economic and Revenue Forecast Council fits. I think unfortunately we've lost Dave, but he did put through the primary content that he was delivering, so that's very good. And if there are questions for him, we certainly can pass those on.
Yeah, Dave, let us know if you get back on. Here's the kind of last slide he was going to present, so I'll just leave it here for a second. Folks can read it. But he did provide some of this content or this background on the new process for forecasting. So if there are questions for Dave, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we can make sure those get answered.
It also looks like Rima Griffith may have been bumped out. Hopefully she's able to get back on.
Oh no, 2 of our featured speakers get bumped out. Okay, well, we will go on to some of the numbers, and I think Paula, you were going to present some of these numbers. So hopefully you can hit these first few slides, and then Rima will present the toll and RUC.
It does appear that the Transportation Commission Executive Director has been able to join again, and I will touch on some revenue sources for Washington and then turn it over to her. And we would ask that if you have questions about the funding slides, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them there. Our executive director is suffering from hoarseness right now, and maybe a little challenging to answer your questions verbally. So we'd be happy to answer them in writing. We can either do that in the chat or send you an email. So with that, I'll jump in and ask for the next slide, please. So just a quick review for you of the revenue sources that come into our state for transportation. Just mentioning as a bit of background here, we have quite a massive transportation infrastructure system in Washington, and it takes quite a bit to maintain it. There's over 7,000 miles of state highways. County roads are nearly 40,000 miles at this point in our state. And our total system for Washington State is over 165,000 miles of streets, roads, and highways. It's a very, very large system. Our total revenue for the state portion of that is, so just the state portion, not the local portion, is 7.02 billion. And the largest portion of that comes from our motor vehicle fuel tax, our gas tax collection, roughly 3.4 billion. We also have revenue sources that come from licenses, permits, and fees at about 2 billion, and then ferry revenues and other sources. We also see state funding coming to fund the state system through general fund, federal funds, which I'll talk about next, and bonding authority, as well as our Climate Commitment Act. And just to give you a sense of the gap, just maintenance and preservation of the system, the shortfall annually of the state system only is over $1 billion a year. So we're seeing that gap increasing, and with that, I'll ask for the next slide and talk briefly about the federal funding. In addition to the state funding sources, Washington State receives federal funding. The last federal Transportation Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it was called, provided our state with $5.4 billion in transportation formula funding over the 5-year life of that act, which is from 2022 to 2026. And that is about 1.7 billion more than the prior funding package at the federal level, which was called the FAST Act. So, so far in that 5-year period, Washington has seen more than 750 million in federal grant funding that's been awarded to DOT as well. And that has gone largely to as you see the breakdown here and how that's been distributed: highway performance, bridge replacement, surface transportation are large ones, but also to ferries, congestion mitigation, air quality, and other sectors. And lastly, I'll quickly touch on the local revenue. For this, I wanted to talk briefly about some of the information that our Association of Washington Cities has collected in their annual survey from cities. Their annual survey is showing that 70% of cities report that state and federal funding sources do not meet their infrastructure funding needs. And for them, maintenance and preservation are a top priority, identified by a staggering 83% of cities. The city systems, city and county systems, 69% of city and 65% of county transportation revenue is locally generated. And that is from sales, property tax, vehicle fees. And then additionally, 21.5% of city and 25% of county transportation revenue comes from the state. And federal funds contribute about 9.5% to cities and 10% to counties of their overall revenue. Transit revenue comes from locally approved sales tax, fare box receipts, and federal and state grants. And port revenues come from user fees, leases, property taxes, and grants. And that is just a very quick overview of our state and local transportation system revenue sources. And with that, I will turn it over to Rima Griffith, the Executive Director of the Transportation Commission.
Thanks, Paula. Good to be online with everybody today. I apologize, I'm under the weather, so bear with me if my voice is a little scratchy or phases out and it looks like I'm whispering. But anyway, we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of transportation funding and kind of the tools we have today, which is tolling. Many of you are probably well aware and have experienced one of our tolled facilities. In Washington State, the legislature is using tolling largely to manage traffic as well as to raise vital revenue for major mega projects like the 520 floating bridge. We use our toll revenue under lots required to be used to pay for debt, maintenance, operations of each tolled facility. And as you can see to the right, there's an interesting kind of governance structure, if you will, around how we manage it. The Washington State Legislature is the body that authorizes the facilities and determines how those toll revenues will be spent. The Department of Transportation builds, plans, and operates those facilities. The Commission sets the toll rates and the policies and the exemptions, and the State Treasurer's Office handles the financing and issuing of debt for those facilities. Next slide, please. This is just a quick snapshot of the toll facilities that we have today that are active. They're listed in order of when they opened. The first one was the SR-16 Tacoma Narrows Bridge, which opened in 2007. And the approach to tolling there is a flat rate, and it's very basic and is designed to simply repay those construction bonds. Next up, we have the SR-167 hot lanes opened in 2008. Those are what we refer to as dynamic toll rates. They manage traffic performance. No debt is issued against that facility. It's largely there to give drivers an opportunity to get a reliable trip when congestion clogs up those general purpose lanes. On the SR-520 bridge, it opened in 2011, and there we use what we call variable toll rates, where the rate structure it varies throughout the day by time of day and day of week. But it's set in a schedule so drivers can anticipate, where the rates on the hot lanes, and in a minute I'll talk about the express toll lanes, vary based on the travel demand at the time in those lanes. On the 520 bridge, again, those revenues are dedicated to repaying the bonds for the construction, as well as managing traffic on that facility. The I-405 express toll lanes opened in 2015, similar to the 167 hot lanes. They too are dynamic toll rates and respond to the traffic conditions at the time. And lastly, our most recent project that opened was the SR-99 tunnel. It opened in 2019. And there we, similar to the 520 bridge, use a variable toll rate structure to manage that facility. Next slide, please. Some future toll projects that are in the lineup and are authorized by the legislature. The I-405 express toll lanes Renton to Bellevue segment is in progress. The 167 hot lane extension is also in progress. The Puget Sound Gateway program that will basically work from 167 and connect it up over to I-5, and then we will create a 167 expressway. It'll be a new facility along with the SR-509 expressway. And then, of course, the Interstate 5 Columbia River Bridge Replacement Project is moving along, and that will be opening or going to construction, I should say, later in the decade. As we look out into the future, maybe a possible toll facility that might get authorized down the road by the legislature would be US 2, the westbound trestle replacement project. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned earlier, the Commission has been studying road usage charging as a possible future tool to help replace the gas tax and fund our transportation system. The problem is really boiled down to this very simple image. Cars are getting much more fuel efficient. And in this case, we took a 2009 Toyota Camry and a 2023 Camry hybrid. And as you can see, the gas mileage more than miles per gallon doubles. Fuel efficiency is great. It's great for our climate, not so great for those gas tax revenues. As you can see, they're cut nearly in half. And this carries a huge impact to our transportation funding structure. As Paula covered, the gas tax plays a very large role in our overall funding structure. Next slide. This graph just kind of shows what our forecast is telling us as we assume a pretty moderate vehicle fleet transition from the older cars that are in the fleet today to more efficient cars, to electric vehicles, and to other alternative fuel cars over time. By 2035, we do have a law in place that will require that 100% of new cars sold in our state will have to be zero emission vehicles. Gas taxes will decline to under $1 billion at that point. It's a significant drop, but as you can see, by 2050, we go well below 300 million, and that gas tax is really drying up at that point. So this is not a sliding scale that we want to be on. So the legislature has had the commission studying road usage charging and is preparing to introduce some proposals perhaps in the 2025 session to get the wheels turning on a transition over the next decade. Next slide, please. So why road usage charging? Well, there's some basic reasons why we've concluded this after about 11 years of research. It really provides a viable usage-based funding source for the transportation infrastructure, similar to how the gas tax is a usage-based tax as well. It can generate the level of sustainable long-term revenue we're going to need for our system. The implementation can be simple, it's enforceable, and it's secure. It enables a more equitable way to fund our transportation system. So if you happen to be in a car today that gets a pretty low MPG of say under 20 miles per gallon, you could be paying as much as 4 to 6 cents a mile today under the gas tax. However, if I'm driving a car, maybe like that Camry that gets 52 miles per gallon, I might only be paying a penny a mile. So depending on the car type you have today is really dictating how much you are paying into our system and what those costs are and how they impact your household income. RUC would level the playing field using a flat per mile fee that all drivers would pay, regardless of the type of car they drive or their MPG. And lastly, it's been determined repeatedly nationally by national commissions and in multiple states. The road usage charging is the most viable, and in fact has been implemented in 5 states already. So it's not really a novel idea anymore, although states are still working to scale it. It is a proven approach to being able to fund our system. Next slide, please. So just to be clear, road usage charges as being studied and per the legislature's intent would not be on top of the gas tax. It would be in the place of. Gas taxes would be treated as a prepayment toward those RUC charges if you're driving a gas vehicle and continue to fill up, but happen to join the road usage charge program. The amount of fuel tax a driver pays can be directly measured or estimated using your car's EPA fuel economy rating. But other benefits of leaving the gas tax in place for a while, in addition to giving credits and bringing down those RUC charges for folks as they get their quarterly bills, would support a seamless interstate travel. It would enable small incremental payments towards their RUC charges. It would serve as a natural backstop against tax evasion, and would ensure that our state can meet its legal requirements for all the outstanding bonds that have been issued against the gas tax over the last several years. Next slide, please. So just real quick, the way we've studied it and the way the legislature seems to be heading is drivers will have a choice of how they'd want to report their miles. The program would largely start as voluntary, and drivers could pick if they want to do an odometer read, which does not require any GPS. Drivers could just report their odometer each year when they renew their tabs. It could be that simple. Or gas tax credits could be applied, and then their balance of RUC would be added to their vehicle registration costs at that time if they indeed owe something. We've tested a smartphone app. It's really not ready for prime time, but we do think that this is going to be a bridge technology to allow drivers who maybe want that odometer read, don't want GPS, but they go out of state sometimes and they don't want to pay for those miles out of state. A smartphone app would be a tool that would allow drivers to temporarily turn on GPS and in a way kind of document or certify the miles that were out of state. And lastly, the common approach in other states is the plug-in device, which drivers can use with or without GPS. In our pilot, 56% of our drivers picked it with GPS, and 37% picked it without. It was a popular approach, but when you combine that with the odometer read, we had over half of our drivers choose options that didn't enable the use of GPS. So the point is that drivers will have choices. We don't have to use GPS to do this, and it's a reliable way to fund our transportation system moving forward.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you so much, Rima and Paula. So if you have questions, you can email Rima, you can email the Transportation Commission at that transc@wstc.wa.gov. As Executive Director Rima mentioned, she's a bit under the weather, so I'm going to hope to keep her talking to a minimum to respect her voice. But if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're gonna get to the Q&A, or I guess the more interactive section of this discussion now. And so obviously we've presented a lot on RUC. It's certainly not the only option to solve our transportation funding challenges. So we want to hear from you a series of questions related to transportation funding, and hopefully that will help influence the recommendations for new strategies in the WTP. So I'm going to get
Jonathan,
into, yes.
I just quickly would point out there's 2 or 3 questions in the chat right now. If Rima, if you want to try to type responses, we may also email you a response for longer, if longer responses are needed. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. So thanks. Keep the questions coming. Okay, so first we're going to have a few multiple choice questions just to kind of get a pulse check on how you all are thinking about these issues. We'll have time for discussion as well for you to add some nuance to your responses, and then we do have some short answer questions as well. Again, we're going to be using the Mentimeter poll. So if you've just joined us, you can go to menti.com, enter this code. If you have been answered a poll question already, it should automatically switch to this question. So this is a multiple choice, just 2 choices. So should the future of transportation funding be based on a user pay approach? You use it, you pay for it. So those are the tolling and RUC examples are 2 options for that. Gas tax is also a user pay approach. There's also flat fees, vehicle license registration fees, general taxes. So just conceptually, do you think it should be a user pay approach or a kind of a shared funding approach for transportation funding? Okay, we've got about 40 responses in.
We have a comment in the chat that Menti will not let me enter that code.
Let's see, is that the right code? If you're in the chat, let me put the direct link. This should work as well. Can you just try clicking on that link? Okay, so we've got some good responses. Majority of you believe it should be user pay approach, but a good chunk of you also would support shared funding or flat fees. Another question that we have, and we'll get into a discussion about this if you have any thoughts on why you chose one or the other. But the next question is more of a short answer. So one of the challenges could be described as maybe our short-sightedness in terms of transportation funding, only addressing a failing bridge after it fails, or when it's in its last stages. So how can we better communicate the need for longer term vision for funding the maintenance and improvements on the transportation system, given that we know that the gas tax is not going to be sustainable long term, given that the backlog of maintenance is so great? What are some of the tools or approaches that we can use to communicate this need to the public, to other stakeholders? So go to the Menti quiz and you can enter your short answer, and I'll show those responses real time on the screen as well. Okay, so we have the fiscal cliff. So just highlighting that, sharing information about that fiscal cliff as much as we can. Plainly identifying risk and the consequences, the consequences of inaction. I think there are a lot of examples now we can start to point to, unfortunately, of when we don't address some of these issues. County and city governments can help. Present a vision rather than describing the dire state of things. I like that, creating excitement. So I think there's an opportunity to, it's not just preventing harm or preventing catastrophe, but there's proactivity in terms of maintaining the system, addressing multiple co-benefits of kind of climate resiliency and adaptation, as well as improving the quality of the system. So I like that. Post remaining expected life for Bridget. So actually showcasing the useful life of the bridge as someone's driving over it. That would be that would certainly raise some eyebrows. Looking at the ferries, it's a great, in Washington State, that's a great example. Sharing more information about the miles. Quick, accurate responses to misinformation campaigns. So just sharing more fact-based information. Be site specific, engage and communicate with local communities and residents. I like that. Plain talk. So lots of great responses in here. So keep them coming, and we're going to open it up for group discussion, both on kind of who pays, as well as oops. So if you have any thoughts on the user approach versus the flat fee approach, please raise your hand, and we can and you can unmute and share your thoughts. Or also, if you want to kind of elaborate on anything that you've seen or put into this chat around communicating the issue and the challenge, I'll keep this open, but you should be able to scroll up and down as well to see other responses. Anyone want to chime in on one of those two questions? Nathan Howard.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about the two different approaches with the flat fee versus the usage. I feel like that argument between the two isn't maybe the fairest to say, because there's pros and cons about each. If the usage charge, it discourages people from or it hurts the system if people try to avoid driving. Let's say they want to take transit more, then it's if we encourage people to ride the bus or take the train or carpool, then that means lower cost for the state system and local system. And then a flat fee can also have an equity piece to it, but then again, the use charge can have an equity piece because if you're having to drive a lot for work, and that's just what you have to do, that might be a punishment you have when you don't have the luxury of something maybe like a light rail or other things. So I don't know if I guess I'm concerned that it's not addressing the long-term issue of what if we move towards more of like a public transit system, and we aren't collecting as much, people aren't driving as much, which is a good thing. Then we're back to the gas tax issue, which is, fuel efficiency is a good thing, but it's hurting the state maintenance costs, or the state revenue costs.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great points. Grace, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I want to add on to what Nathan is saying. I think it's setting a better understanding that the value and principle is, do we want to do this as a tax or user fee? Like using as a fair example, in Skagit County, we're one of the four county within the state that has a ferry system. So our ferry is being treated as a road, because we're taking cars similar to Washington State Ferry, but everybody else that helps fund the ferry, whether you ride it or not. But then people that are the poorer people, or the people that are not, doesn't have cars or chose to ride transit, that's also subsidized. But then when you do user fee in cars, that is really not subsidized by the county. So I think in my head I have like, are we treating equity piece? So when we do transportation, are we doing road transportations versus transit transportation? And which one are we flat fee as a tax? So everybody paying the system, but which one is a user fee? And are we treating the two animals the same?
Yeah, I think these are great points, and I think that it is that kind of, we wanted the binary question, right? But it's not binary, and I don't think any state that's rolled it out has treated it as truly binary. And there's going to be subsidies, right? There's different goals. Is it raising revenue? Is it reducing VMT? So I think there's a variety of different approaches that different states are taking. And I think you can have sort of a blended approach that sort of addresses some of those priorities. And I think those are really good points. And also someone in the chat put about vehicle size, right? I think that states are maybe nervous to include that, but I think certainly when, for heavy duty vehicles, that's going to have to be an important part of it, or at least in my opinion. That could be the future where the vehicle size kind of comes into it, but it might not be politically palatable to kind of introduce that right away. So I think these structures should be designed to change over time, and hopefully they will as the kind of reality changes. Other thoughts on who pays or kind of communicating the problem? All right. Well, we can move on and come back to these topics as if new ideas come up. We have some related questions, so I think these will remain top of mind. The next series of questions relate to funding priorities. So if there were a new source of funding or a greater amount of funding, how should we prioritize those future investments? So this is a ranked choice exercise. If you're using your smartphone, you should be able to kind of click and drag the different options. Similarly, on your computer, you have to click and kind of drag them into the order of importance. And this is certainly not all of the options. And so if there's something else is you'd like to see closer to the top, please use the other and let us know what that might be. So again, go to the menti.com, 6218-0311 is the code. Okay, we'll give it another 10 seconds or so to make sure you can rank your choices and click submit. All right, so the non-real-time static version of this, which is changing as I see, but maintenance and preservation rose to the top with safety close behind it. Yeah, we definitely set up maintenance and preservation as one of the key issues here. So that's maybe unsurprising, but obviously a lot of other priorities and really the statistics that Paula presented earlier just highlighted how there's this huge maintenance and funding preservation gap. That's a huge priority of cities as well. But we also need to expand the system, or at least expand options, make the system more efficient. So there is this balance that needs to be struck in the future. Okay, so next question we have, again, it's a multiple choice, 2 choice option. So binary, but curious if you have any thoughts about this as well. Should future funding be dedicated to specific purposes or placed in a fund with no limits where funds can be spent within transportation? So just transportation, but specific projects, specific uses, or more of a transportation general fund? Okay, so we have a little over half of you say dedicate the state transportation to specific uses, and then 16 out of, or about a third of you saying non-dedicated, so open to any transportation uses. So I'd like to open it up again for comments. So do you have anything to share on why you chose a specific priority, why you chose specific versus a non-dedicated source for the allocation? Yeah, Leslie.
Good morning. I didn't vote. It needs to be both. There needs to be some dedicated buckets, as well as some that a bucket of money that can be used as needed.
And I agree with you. Do you think that that is because, sorry to ask a follow-up question, is that to make it more politically palatable, to give people sort of something specific to look at, but also give flexibility in the future?
I don't think politically, no. I think it's, I mean, just the same as we would put money in a savings account, maybe have two accounts. One is specifically for the vacation to Disneyland, and the other one is for all those oh darn things that happen when the washing machine breaks, or emergency pieces.
Thank you.
Or other special things that come up that you maybe didn't plan for, but would really like to do.
Thanks. Maxwell?
So I chose for prioritization, I chose multimodal system because I think it's part of the social contract that if our argument to users is get out of your single occupancy vehicle and use some kind of multimodal option, active transportation, public transit, et cetera, then we need to make sure that those investments are fulfilling that need. Because if we don't, people aren't going to use them, no matter how much we tell them about the benefits, and no matter what punitive charges or system of road use charges or whatever we inflict. People are smart. They're going to choose the option that works for them, and we need to make sure that that option is in reality. We need to make sure that the multimodal option is actually attractive to users if we're going to turn around and try and disincentivize the usage of the not preferred modes like the single occupancy vehicles.
Great point. Yeah, Grace?
Adding to what Leslie said, each jurisdictions and municipalities has its own unique needs that may not fall into the predefined bucket. So having it in the more of a general funds to let the jurisdictions to allocate it in accordingly, that would be very helpful. Also wanted to add, because we've been so far behind in the maintenance and operations, we end up a lot of our projects within the county at least falls into FEMA emergency when a big flood comes through and the culvert finally get blown out. And so then now we're having emergency situations. And sometimes when those events are not declared, then the road will be closed forever because we don't even really have the funding for that. So there's one more piece there in the maintenance operation. It's in the queue, but we just never got to it, and now became a disaster, which should never have been, but that's where the state that we're at.
Thank you. Well, the next section's on local allocation, so that's a good segue. Other thoughts on investment priorities or how the funds would be distributed or could be distributed? Okay, so the next section of questions, as I mentioned, is on allocation. This is specifically to funding that's dedicated for local jurisdictions. So should the future state funding for local jurisdictions be allocated using a competitive grant funding approach or through formula distribution? We may get the same comments about potentially both, but maybe if you had to pick one or the other, how would you allocate the funding?
And there is kind of an important distinction here. You know, sometimes this competitive grant process can be at the state or federal level, and also it can be at the regional level. So thinking about that, might be interesting to talk a bit about, and formula distribution as well.
So most of you chose formula distribution. We also got some comments in the chat about it being a combination of both or being too broad of a question. And so, certainly agree with that it could be a combination, but it's good to get your feedback on those two options. The next question is, and I'll go to Ashley Probart if you want to ask a question or comment on this last one. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would just say I'm the director for the Transportation Improvement Board, and so we're basically the preservation program for all cities under 5,000. And under current state distribution of like $20 per capita, if you have a town of 1,000 and you're getting a distribution of $20, that's only $20,000, and there's just no way for small agencies that any distribution formula is going to get them to yes for maintenance preservation. And that's why it needs to be a blend of grants and direct distribution. The math just won't support it any other way.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, so question for local jurisdictions here. What do you believe are the primary constraints local jurisdictions face in trying to generate transportation revenue at the local level? This is a short answer, so please type your thoughts into the chat and then we can discuss them. Or not the chat, excuse me, the Menti poll. Okay, lack of political will to establish transportation benefit districts, distaste for additional taxing from the public, lack of capacity to pursue those competitive grants, political will. The push for new over maintenance, so funding the shiny new capital projects versus maintaining the system. This is the point that Ashley made, taxes or fees on small populations doesn't, I guess, a similar point, does not raise much revenue just from the size of the town. In rural areas, hard pressed to raise enough funds, not enough tax base. Lack of local options for county governments. So are there the administrative or authorities are not in place to generate new taxes. So confuse public as they vote for tax increases and don't see the translate to their local needs. It's a great point. Okay, so keep adding thoughts to the chat. I think that might be the last question in this section. So I'll keep sharing my screen with the Menti poll, so you can see what others have put in here. But other thoughts on allocation to local jurisdictions, the challenges that local jurisdictions are facing in terms of raising additional revenue or having adequate revenue to maintain and expand the system.
There's also some great points being dropped in the chat. If you want to peruse those, it's interesting discussion. Appreciate it.
Okay, anyone want to come off mute and share your thoughts? Great. Well, I really appreciate all of these comments. These are fantastic, and we look forward to digging into them and digesting them. Okay, so let's move on to the last section, and we should have some time to let you out a few minutes early. So this is kind of a other open conversation. So we talked about tolling, we talked about RUC. There are other ideas, or there may be other ideas out there that you all are considering, that you all want to share as potential strategies for sustainable long-term funding for the Washington Transportation Plan. So what are some other ideas that the state should be looking at for raising additional revenue for transportation? So go ahead and add your thoughts to the Mentimeter chat. Say statewide sales tax dedicated to transportation, retail delivery fees. I know that's being studied. Yeah, Gordon, do you want to add something verbally to this question? Congestion pricing.
Sure. Good to see you, John and Paula. We've discussed this before, but just to share this with the group, I'm really disappointed that it seems to be a predisposed goal to pursue abandoning the point of sale model for road usage charges. That's eminently fair. Heavier vehicles use more fuel. Heavier vehicles do contribute more towards road wear. Clark PUD is already putting the infrastructure in place to make this happen, and they're rebating residential EV chargers that have communications capability to the utility. Has an advantage to the utility because they can negotiate with the charger to not charge during peak grid time, so that it's got a grid reliability component. But it also allows a reporting of how many kilowatt hours a charger dispenses at a residence. We can come up with a number, it's about 4.7 cents a kilowatt hour, I think. That is an exact equivalent to what a vehicle pays in road usage charges per mile to what someone in a petroleum fuel vehicle does. And it would allow us to adjust the road usage charge as the budgets require. And it doesn't require any technology investment. It is just a firmware adjustment. We already have a billing relationship with our electric utility. They're also seeing the windfall of all this new revenue coming in. So they're a beneficiary. All that they would have to do is adjust their billing system to add a line item, very much like we pay 911 charges on our cell phone bills. I've submitted papers to you, John, and to Paula. Hopefully you're sharing them. Debbie, I hope you've had a chance to review it. This is a simple, non-invasive approach that also should set us up for federal funding, since a third of what we're collecting in road usage charges is going back to the federal government.
Yeah.
Commercial chargers, no problem. They're already, a bulk fuel distributor. So
We do
I
have
will-
your paper, right? We do have your paper, Gordon. Thank you so much for submitting that to us.
Yeah,
And go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your comments, and I know the commission has the paper, and I think we for everyone else on the call, there's a huge process underway to look at RUC, and I'm certainly not the expert. There's a whole different project team on that, and so I think that please continue to share your thoughts with the commission staff who are working on that effort. Today I appreciate all your thoughts, and we just want to kind of focus on less on the technology and more on sort of the policies, but your points are very well taken, so I appreciate you sharing those here. So there's a lot of good stuff popping up in the chat around congestion pricing, delivery fees, local option for RUC, value captures, allowing property taxes to increase, and capturing the value, vehicle sales tax, property tax, maintaining the Climate Commitment Act. There was another great one in here, indexing the non-gas tax fees to inflation, eliminating a local levy lid, so allowing local jurisdictions to generate more revenue at the local level. Anyone want to come online off mute and provide some more feedback on these? Yes, Colin.
Hi there, Colin. I'm the director here at San Juan County Public Works. Hand in hand with talking about ways to generate revenue, I would like also to make sure we consider ways of making it easier to spend money. The regulatory environment, there seems to be a continual throughput of ways to kind of well-intended ways, but just make our jobs more difficult on delivering projects, hand in hand, more expensive, more time consuming. We can probably do more with what we have if it was easier to deliver projects. The state has certain exemptions through the regulatory framework that are not afforded to local agencies through SEPA and others. I mean, there's ways that we can, especially with local agencies, help them deliver their projects. So I encourage that to be part of the equation. And then along with some of the many other comments on here, ordinary maintenance and preservation, we need dedicated revenue sources. Competitive grants, I really just don't want to see another competitive grant program pushed out to transportation. It's just really a difficult way to program and plan and deliver projects. They take resources to stand up. They take a lot of resources to go for it. And there's always that, how big do you go? How much money do you spend? How likely are you to get any money? Dedicated revenues where we should be focusing, especially with ordinary maintenance and preservation. Grant programs are just not conducive to small agencies. So please, let's try to stay away from that. And just, again, let's try to make our work easier by changing the framework in which we have to operate it.
Thank you, Colin. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. You have a really important perspective to share, and you're kind of on the front lines, and necessity is sort of the mother of invention. A lot of counties are sharing with the commissioners some of the innovative ways they're finding efficiencies and ways through the regulatory framework. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Other thoughts on other innovative ideas for long-term sustainable funding? Okay, moving on to the last question, which is very open-ended. Other feedback. Is there anything else you'd want to share about sustainable funding that can help shape the WTP? So this question is anything we didn't cover today. Please put it in here so we can document it, so we can make sure we take a look at that as we're developing the refined strategies. And we can leave this part of the quiz open for a few minutes after we break if you want to add some more thoughts. So I will start the kind of wrap up slides, and please, add your thoughts to that final question if you have them, or I'll share my email address at the end of this presentation. You can send them directly to me. You can also raise your hand if you have anything else to share in the closing minutes. So I wanted to just highlight the next steps for you all. So we have additional topic focused meetings in late August and early September. So these are, as we mentioned earlier, connecting communities next week, and then equity the following week on the 5th. Both are at 10 a.m. Pacific on Thursdays. We're going to be taking all of this feedback, looking at the previous WTP strategies, looking at the kind of new emerging priorities, and distilling what we're hearing from you all into some refined and revised strategies. We'll share those first with the legislature, with the state agencies, and then come back to share with all of you in early 2025. So we have additional meetings to look at those draft strategies planned for 2025, and then into the second half of next year, we'll be developing the actual plan. So finalizing the strategies and developing the Washington Transportation Plan. So thank you so much for joining. Please keep adding to the Menti poll. I see some good thoughts coming in there now, so you can keep that link open and keep adding thoughts for a few more minutes. But with that, I'd like to just thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Dave and Rima, for sharing your perspective, and everyone else. We'll be posting this recording hopefully sometime this week, if not early next week. And please, you can email me directly if you'd like a copy of the slides. There's my email addresses on the deck right there. Again, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all for joining today. Please email us with questions and we'll get back to your questions from the chat.
Thank you.